Welcome back to the channel, and let's continue now with Black Adam, and this is a second figure that came out with a cloak. I was not happy with what was in the box, so I had to customize that cloak to make it look more dynamic. Now this is a point that we want to get to in the video, and I'll show you how to get here. However, I do have to advise you that this is a little bit more complicated than making a cape. There's actually 4 pieces here sewn together, and there's 5 wires total. The hand painting is a whole different story, and I'll leave that up to you. It's up to you, your criteria, if you even want to hand paint it. But I will let you know that it is required of a little bit more time and intricate work here. And the cape itself, or the cloak better said, is not a cape, so it does not flow the same. It has to actually be cut differently. So if you only cut the 2 pieces, you'll be fine, but if you go the extra step and cut the extra 2 pieces, it'll look that much more dynamic. But let's get started. As with many of the other Mcfarlane pieces, let's start by removing the head. This one pops off really easy. The cape itself is held in by a key glued into the front of the chest. And then just underneath that is actually the emblem that we will remove using a heat gun or a hair dryer. I do not soak my figures in water unless I truly have to. These things are so soft and so easily made that they come apart fairly easy. A hair dryer at high heat is enough heat to loosen the plastic or the glue to remove them from each other. Now if we use the graph that's on this chart here, we can determine how much material we're going to need as far as height, and then take into account the curvature that goes over the shoulders. That'll give us an approximate of what we need in material to cut this cloak. And if you observe closely, it's a 1 piece of material that drapes around each of the shoulders. So let's start with the material that we are going to use, and this is a fabric quarter, and these are about $1.50 at Walmart, about $2.50 at Joann's fabric store. So depending where you want to go and pick it up, it's going to be the same material, same supplier. It's just 2 different stores, and it's $1 more at the other. Now after you unfold it and take it out of the package, then you're going to have to iron out those creases because they are going to be a nuisance as you're trying to cut down your fabric. It's about 18 by 20, and you're going to cut down just to what you need. So you can cut it in half, and this is now an 8 by 8 square. And now we're going to cut our semicircle because we want a semicircle for the cloak. So it's going to be the same pattern cut as a cape, but remember, this is not a cape, this is a cloak, and it wraps around the shoulders much more differently than a cape does. And this will continue to have 2 more pieces, actually 3 pieces, to finalize the actual look. We need a hood, and we need 2 cross sections that will go over the shoulder. So taking a rotary blade like you see here, and make sure it's a nice sharp rotary blade, you're just going to cut a half moon going from corner to corner to make it a nice smooth cut, and that should do it. If you have a little hang up here and there, you can just pull the material and go over that one thread to cut it loose. Now that we have our half circle cut, we can open it entirely, and we see our half moon here. This is going to be a perfect outline to make our cloak. And if you were making a cape, this is great. Now if you pull down one corner, if you pull it down to the bottom, you can see that when it falls down, it will come down to the same level as the bottom part of the cape. Or I should say cloak. I keep saying cape, but it is really a cloak. Now we need to cut the top to actually include the hood. Now I've taken the remnant from that half circle we cut, and I've cut the angles I need for the actual hood. And if you want to practice cutting on a second one, you can. but I'm showing you here what it is that I did on the one that I did on top. I'm just cutting off the part of the bottom, cutting off the back end, and then cutting off the front end to get somewhat of the shape that I need. Depending on how you want it to look, if you want it a little bit more angled toward the front or angled toward the back, I'm going with the one on top. I really like the way this one is cut. Now once you've cut your pattern, you're going to sew an edge to the hood so you can slide a wire in. And then you're going to attach this to the actual half moon that you've already cut ahead of time. And once you've got those together, then you've got the first part of the hood ready to go. Let me show you what that looks like. Now, this figure is different because there's actually no neck or even neck muscles that are included in the top of the figure, and there's a reason for that. That's because there's so much more material that goes around the neck that they needed to eliminate for that excess fabric, in this case plastic, that was there. Now as you can tell, I've already sewn in the edges on the cape itself as well. You can tell the stitching is really small and it's very tight, so that avoids having to have that series of little air pockets that form when you have wider, longer stitching. So it really makes a difference as to the size of the stitching that you are using. And of course, if you use the same color thread, then you obviously make it that much more invisible. Now the clamp that you see at the bottom of the chin is the wire that is now inserted into the hood. And I've clamped it just together so that I can get a better fit as I manipulate the garment around the figure to find out where I'm going to insert my next wire, where I'm going to do some more stitching or some pleating. So if you've got this figure and you've taken the cloak off, you know that the cloak is supposed to be a one-piece unit or one fabric that actually wraps around him across the neck over the shoulder. But if we did that with this material, it's such a small figure that it's just too bulky. So we have to simulate the look that he's actually having that garment thrown over his shoulder on both sides. That way it'll give the appearance that it's a one-piece fabric that is wrapping around him with an integrated hoodie. Now, obviously we can't do that here, so we have to simulate it as I mentioned before. So the hoodie is attached to the actual main piece of the actual cloak itself. We are going to have to add some pleats, and we need to add those pleats to the back of the hoodie so that it looks like it's got the standard museum pose when you have, I should say, a relaxed look. Now along the bottom, we do have to find a way to implement the hieroglyphics or the drawings. So I've tried many things. I tried making a casting, and it just didn't work. I also tried making a stamp out of this casting. That didn't work either. I don't have a 3D printer. I've got to do everything by hand. So using this silicone mold, I was able to then create my little stamp. And as I mentioned, it just didn't work because the surface is irregular. So I had too many high spots, too many low spots. I tried using the metallic paint just to see what it would look like. Again, this took me a very long time to figure this part out, how I was going to do it, simply because I needed to get it right the first time. So I practiced on the remnants that I had from the cutouts of the material. So with a brush, I applied the paint onto my homemade stamp just to see how it would work out. And at first, you're looking at the stamp, oh, this is great, it's going to work out, there's plenty of texture there. Yeah, there's also some high spots and low spots that are just not going to fill in. And no matter what I did to change it, I just couldn't get it right. So I decided to make a different stamp. And I made it out of the actual cape. That didn't work. So I made another one, now a third one, out of epoxy. Let it harden, sanded it, polished it out, and while I did that, I went ahead and filled the holes in the back of the head, and then I'll paint match the skin tone later. It all comes down to I resorted to a Sharpie. Yeah, I ran out of ink. But if you look on the right side, that's what it's supposed to look like. I love the Sharpie, so I had to hand paint or draw all of the hieroglyphics. Now, getting back to the actual cloak itself, once you sew the bottom of the hoodie all the way to the edges, then you'll have a starting point to get the rest of it done. Now, before we do anything else, any ironing, any pleating, etc., we have to get our hieroglyphics or our drawing in place. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'll show you in just a minute what the process looks finalized. But this is the piece that we need to add to the inside. This triangular piece is going to be the element that's going to give us the illusion that he has a one-piece cloak that he wraps around over his shoulder on the left and the right side. So that means that we also have to implement the design that we're going to choose onto this. And we will have to add pleats to this as well too. And we need to add a channel for the wire that's going to go through this, because otherwise it's not going to look correct. So yeah, this is where it gets tricky. Each one is an individual project. So this is like a mini cape that goes on the inside and same on the left. Let me show you what it ends up looking like. Once you add your pleats, obviously this is after you've painted the edge. This is what it looks like painted. And I had to hand paint each and every one of those dots and circles. So that was tedious. It takes a while, and I did it just with using other objects that I had on hand, and I just used the edge, dipped it in paint, and stamped it. You're going to have to figure out what things you have on hand that will let you create something like this. So it makes it more unique to what you have. Now, as you saw, the two pieces additional also have the stamping. That has to go on the inside though. If you put it on the inside opposite each other, the designed edge has to be at the bottom. And as you can tell, it's also pleated. So it's going to be pleated in the direction that it's going to be folding over. So we want it at the bottom because it goes under the chin. We want it to simulate that it's the outer edge of the cloak. Same thing on the opposite. As you sew it together, be careful not to sew the opening where your wire is going to go. Your completed look should be this. It is sewn on the inside to each other, and there are wires now going at the edge of the cloak, the main part, and at the edges and the bottom edge of those two additional pieces, plus the wire that is in the hoodie. So there's your 5 wires. Now this is not a video about the lighting, but I will tell you what I did as far as the emblem, because I did put a light behind it. I made a casting or mold out of this silicone mold that it's reusable, and it took a few tries to get it right. It took me 4 attempts. I finally got the one I really like. This is the one you'll see finalized on the figure. It's resin, so I filled it in with this. I colored my resin to what I wanted to have. I started off with yellow. I didn't have enough yellow in it. I added more, then I added a little bit of red to turn it orange. That's what I ended up liking better because of the color that was transmitted as it was backlit. And eventually, I ended up getting the one that kind of looks like candy corn, but it actually looks really good once it's illuminated. And once you've got your color mixed into your resin, you want to pour it into your mold. And unfortunately, doing something like this can cause bubbles. So you want to be careful to avoid as many bubbles as possible. If for some reason you do create some bubbles or you've seen some bubbles in there, you need to get those out because they will show up in the final product, or it can even actually weaken the structure of the item you're actually making. So with a lighter, you can pop those bubbles, just holding it over the surface, and eliminates them very quickly. Then you need to cure it, and you cure it by using a UV light or a flashlight like this. Some people call it a torch. If you don't have one of these, not a problem. You can actually put it under the sunlight. So let's get back to the cloak while the resin dries. Now I don't have all the wires in here yet at this point. I only have the wire in the hoodie itself. And you can tell because of how easy the fabric moves when I'm moving it over the shoulder. And I'm just trying to figure out how much tighter do I need to have the hoodie, how much closer do I need to pull in those straps or those pieces that cross over the shoulder, and where should I set the edge of the cloak, the main piece underneath, for this to look correct. It takes a while. There's actually 4 pieces to deal with all at once. And once you have the wire in there and you figure out the look you want to achieve, you'll be able to do that easily with the wire installed. Let me show you why you want those wires. Now this is the reason why you want to have all 4 wires into the cloak. The back 2 pieces at the top have edge and bottom wire. The main cloak only has wire at the edges, no wire at the bottom. Otherwise, you will never be able to have a relaxed look or museum pose. But the other 2 pieces that have wire at the bottom that are individually independent from the actual main part of the cloak will actually have a better characteristic. And of course, these are all attached up at the top, just underneath the edge of the hoodie. If you do not want to add a wire, you do not have to. It will still look that much better than what came out of the box. But look what happens when you add the wire to the fabric. It gives it more character, more life. It's much more dynamic. Now let's take a look at the light that I put into the chest. Lighting it up, you'll see that it's a one light, a continuous light, very different from the first figure. But let me show you what I did to get there. As you saw in the taglines, the lights are from evandesigns.com and of course also from Brixmax. You can get it from either one. The actual battery compartment with switch that you see here, very, very tiny, that's from evandesigns.com. Now, you can purchase this separately or with the battery, and you have to carve out part of the unit on the inside to make room for that battery unit. And those cables come through from the chest. The light that's in the chest has the leads going to the back, and then you cut out a hole in the back for that switch. That way you can play with it on and off. Now, the emblem that's here is the current unit we are working on. And as you can tell, it's more like a candy corn. It's finally cured. I had to trim it down to be able to meet the edges, and now I'm going to glue it and clamp it down so that it holds in place as the glue dries. I don't use super glue because once it's down, you can't pre-adjust it. If I use something like fabric tack glue, it takes a few hours to dry, but I can continuously readjust it if I have to. Use a heat gun to bend that resin into place and make it fit the figure. This is what you'll end up looking like. And yes, then you can cut out a hole for the back for that switch. Now, just in case you are wondering what it looks like in a flight mode, I don't have the light in this one yet. I was waiting for the resin to cure, but I did want to shoot this part of the clip and show you what those wires do to the fabric as if he were in a flight mode. Now keep in mind that if you do this, this is going to take up a lot of real estate on your shelf. He is going to be that much more dynamic than some of the other figures surrounding him. So he needs a lot of space if you want to flare out the cowl. I was going to say cape one more time, but it's a cowl and it's going to take up a lot of space. So now we're going one step further with our cowl. If you want to leave the cowl the way it is, great. But I was told that it doesn't match the body because of the weathering. So I decided to add some weathering to this, or battle damage, you might want to call it. And then this is what I used on my Dremel, this wire brush, to very lightly, I should say very carefully, very strategically place some of the weathering along the edge of the cape. Because if you look at the actual plastic cape that comes with it, there's a lot of a tattered material at the edges. So you just want to be careful here where you're going to place all of that. You don't want to do the entire edge because that'll actually draw too much attention to that. So you want to be strategic where you place it. Now as you're doing this, keep in mind that you have 2 more pieces to do this also, because you want this to match. Now if you want to go into the actual center of the cape, you can do that as well. You just have to be that much more careful, and you've got to be keeping in mind that the actual brush can wrap around that fabric and it can tear it up. So you've got to stretch it out with your fingers, thumb and forefinger, to keep the material flat to the surface as you move that wire brush over it to make those damaged areas. Now we're going to paint it, and I'm just using craft paint. Nothing special here. This is just craft paint, apple barrel, and I've mixed down my color to what I need for the consistency that I need, and I'm just going to add some dirty areas to the edge of the cape. That way it does look like it's weathered or battle worn, and it's going to look that much more believable and in line with the characteristics of the figure. Let's take a look and see what happens. Now as you do this, make sure that you go in layers, because if you go on too thick, then you'll overemphasize that one area. So it's best to go back over and add another layer if you need to add more color. So going lightly through the edge and then into the cape itself, that way it looks a little bit more believable and realistic that the actual dirt and grime are embedded into the fibers of the cape. If you just do the edge, it's going to look really, really tacky. It's going to look obvious what you did. You want it to blend in as best as possible. Unfortunately, the best way to do it is with an airbrush. So if you don't have an airbrush, you can use a spray can. If not, you can attempt to do it with a brush, but you'll have to dry brush it, and you'll have to be very, very careful doing so, because if it's too wet, that material will soak up that paint, and you'll just have a spot that draws attention. I would recommend using an airbrush, borrowing one, or if possible, just get an airbrush. It's only going to cost you the price of 3 action figures, $60-70. It's worth your investment to get one, even if it's one of those that has a built-in compressor. Those are actually really, really handy. So the great thing about spraying this on with an airbrush is that it's pretty much almost dry as it goes onto the surface, because it atomizes with the air, and as soon as it touches that surface, it begins drying. So you'll be finished very, very quickly with your weathering of the cape. And with those wires, check it out. It stands up on its own. So it's really, really easy to work on this particular segment of your cape. But this is all up to you. It's up to your taste. So this is what our figure looks like when fully suspended and with the wires in play and all of the weathering, and here you go. This is what some of you have requested. We want a before and after. Well, here's your before on the left. Not really appealing. And the one on the right. this is what we have now as a dynamic figure. I really like the way it turned out with the weathering and what the wires are doing to the material. The one on the left really needs a lot of work, and I'm glad that I was able to show you what you can do with a figure like this. Now, if you've got the other figure that didn't come with the cloak, you don't need this one. All you need to do is make a cloak for that one. And if you already lit the emblem on the other figure, you don't need to do it again. The one figure will suffice. Let's get a few more perspectives of this figure with this cloak now fully wired. And let's see what it looks like with the emblem lit. I'm really liking the way this turned out. So now that we know that we can actually achieve some really nice dynamic poses with the fabric and the wiring and the lighting, etc., I'm guessing some of you are asking, well, how did you install this? Well, there's a different technique that I had to use on this for installation. And one of the things that I need to point out is on this particular part, I still hadn't installed the wires into the actual chest of the figure, or I should say the clavicles. But I'll show you in just a minute why you need to add the wire from the main part of the cloak and embed it into the figure, because it's going to make a total difference in the presentation and the characteristics of how that cloak will then actually function. Here, I've just pushed it back. They're not attached to the body. They're only free floating inside the fabric. The same with the ones on top. The same with the one in the hoodie. But let me show you the big difference once you actually embed the wires into the body. And that's what I've now been doing with the capes on all of my figures, because it makes a considerable difference. Let me show you. Now, as far as the installation, if you just want to go simple, you can go like this. You can get a snap press button that you can get at the fabric store. It's a two-piece unit. You can glue it in, and you can snap it at the back, as you just saw. One half on the cowl and one half on the body. They snap in together, very simple, and this is what they look like in case you are looking for them at the fabric store. They come in small sets like this, and this is the smallest one that you can get, and it's very unobtrusive. You can either sew it on or you can glue these on. I went with super glue, and I've already taken one apart at the bottom left, going to the top, glue it onto the figure and onto the fabric, and you're set. Now, for the actual cloak itself, the main part of it, I exposed the two wires that were free floating in the edge of the fabric, and I decided to glue those in with super glue. Keep in mind that if you do this, it is now a permanent fixture. The super glue, and by embedding it into the figure, will give it a strong anchor point, and that will make a big difference in how the characteristics of the cloak will then present itself when you do the posing. All you need is a small amount of super glue. Begin with one side, insert that one in, and wait for that to dry. Then work on the other half. Can you do that with the other two pieces that are also free floating? Yes, but you probably won't need to do that. So I know some of you are asking yourselves, does this really make a difference by anchoring it into the body? Well, that's a very good question, and it's got a very simple answer. Take a look, and you tell me if it does or doesn't. So we now have the cloak fully attached to the body. And by being it anchored to the body, we can extend the wires on those edges. They will not twist or turn, they will not fall, and that will make an all in better dynamic pose for your photography. I hope that you enjoyed the video today and that you learned something, and I hope to see you again. Help me push this channel to 5,000 subscribers, and we've got one more thing to give away once we reach 5,000 subscribers. So come back and we'll see what it is. We'll see you next time.